Some things you replay over and over. This one I wish I could forget. It wasn't the worst night I ever had driving. Not in any obvious way. No crash, no threat, no screaming or violence. But something about it stuck to me. There was a moment I looked back and felt like I wasn't in control anymore. Like I was still behind the wheel, but the road had been chosen for me. I remember the air felt weird that night. Not cold exactly, just still. Like the kind of stillness you get before a storm, when even the wind doesn't know which way to blow. Bayside always had that gritty, empty stretch behind the old warehouse buildings, but I'd never picked anyone up there before. The pin dropped right in the middle of the service lane behind a closed marine supply store. I thought maybe it was just GPS being weird again. Happens all the time near the water. But still, I slowed down when I saw someone standing near the curb, half in shadow. He didn't look at me right away. Just stood there with his hoodie pulled up and his head down like he didn't want to be noticed. I called his name, Eli, I think it was, and he nodded once, real slow, before sliding into the back seat without a sound. Didn't say hi, didn't ask where we were going. Nothing. Just sat there staring at something on his phone like the screen held more of his life than the world around him did. I told myself not to overthink it. Quiet rides are common, especially after midnight. People are tired, people are drunk, people don't always want to talk. But this felt different. I don't even know how to explain it. It was like the second he got in, the car felt smaller, not cramped, just compressed, like the air got thinner. I remember my hand hovering over the music controls and then pulling back, like any sound would be the wrong sound. That doesn't usually happen. I don't usually feel watched when someone's barely said a word. But that night, before we'd even pulled away from the curb, something in my body knew I'd just picked up more than a fare. We pulled into the darker part of the route and something shifted again. We were maybe 10 minutes into the ride, coasting through that weird patch of the industrial district where the lights never seemed to work right. I remember the road being darker than usual, no traffic, no storefronts open, just those long stretches of nothing with the occasional broken streetlight flickering in and out like it couldn't decide whether to exist. I was staring ahead, zoned out in that autopilot kind of way, when something off to the side caught my eye, just a faint glow barely there right behind me. At first, I thought it was a reflection. You know, someone's headlights bouncing through the window, or maybe his phone lighting up from a notification. But when I glanced in the mirror, it wasn't moving. It was steady. That pale LED glare pointing up from his lap, not at the window or his face, but just toward me. Not directly, just enough that it felt intentional, like he wanted the light near me, not on me. He didn't react when I noticed. No flinch, no shifting around. He just sat there, his face soft in the glow, still staring at his screen like it was nothing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was something. That light wasn't doing anything useful. It wasn't helping him read, wasn't illuminating anything he needed. It just sat there with him, like it had its own reason for being on. And maybe this sounds dramatic, I don't know. But the moment I noticed it, something cracked a little. Like the air changed, more tense, more narrow. I was still in the front seat, still driving, but it felt like I'd lost a kind of control I didn't even know I had. The inside of the car didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like a place we were both stuck in, and I didn't know what he was waiting for. It got worse before it got clearer. The GPS had us headed straight through an older part of the city, one of those warehouse-lined streets with cracked asphalt and no shoulder. I don't usually question the route unless traffic's bad, but this one felt. Still, I had no reason not to follow it. I remember reaching for the blinker when I heard him speak for the first time. Quiet, flat, but clear. Just told me not to go that way. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look up from his phone. It wasn't a suggestion or a concern. It was more like a correction, like something he already knew. I paused, blinked at the GPS, and just turned the wheel the other way. I didn't argue. I didn't even ask why. I just went with it. Maybe because the tone in his voice left no room for questions, or maybe because some part of me didn't want to know the answer. About 5 minutes later, we passed that same intersection from a different angle, and that's when I saw them. Police cruisers lined up across both lanes, red and blue lights spinning into the sky. The road was completely blocked. No explanation. No detour signs. just flashing lights and 3 officers standing behind yellow tape like they'd been waiting. I remember my stomach tightening, but not in relief. It wasn't good thing we missed that. It was more like, why did he know? There was something in the timing, in the way he'd said it, that made me feel like we were on a path he'd walked before, one I was just now being dragged into. That moment stayed with me longer than it should have. Still does. Eventually we reached the destination, or what the app said was the destination. The neighborhood was already quiet before we even turned in, not just night quiet, but empty. No porch lights, no windows glowing behind drawn curtains, just rows of darkened houses that all looked vaguely the same. I'd only been in that part of town once or twice before, but something about it this time felt different, hollow. We pulled up to the address on the app, and I slowed to a stop in front of a pale, sagging house that looked like it hadn't been lived in for a long time. There was no welcome here, no hint of life, no car in the driveway, no wind chimes on the porch, not even a garbage bin left out by mistake. Just a cracked front step, weeds pushing through the sidewalk, and an empty window with nothing behind it. I asked if this was it, trying to keep my voice light, neutral. He didn't answer, just kept staring straight ahead, like he was waiting for something to start or end. The silence between us was thick by then, not hostile, just heavy, like the car had become a waiting room for something neither of us understood. After a long beat, he finally moved. Not to leave, not really, just to open the door and step out. He didn't walk toward the house. He just stood there, half in the street, with the door still hanging open behind him. I didn't know if I was supposed to wait. I didn't know if he was going to turn around or walk away or say anything, but he didn't. And sitting there, watching him stand in front of that lifeless house like he was expecting it to speak first, that was the moment I realized I might have just driven someone back to something they'd never left. I couldn't go home after that. I didn't want to go home. I found the only place still open, a 24-hour gas station tucked between a car wash and a strip mall with all the gates down. I parked under the brightest security lamp I could find, right next to the side of the building, and told myself I just needed a minute. Bathroom, snack, something cold to hold in my hands. Anything that felt normal. I wasn't inside long, 4, maybe 5 minutes at most, but when I came back and opened the driver's side door, I saw him, sitting in the back seat like he'd never gotten out. Same hoodie, same slouched posture, phone resting on his knee like it had never moved. No sound, no movement, just there. I froze halfway into the seat. My hand was still on the door, my foot barely inside, but my mind had already left the parking lot. I remember this sick lurch in my chest, not fear exactly, more like reality slipping a little off center. I was sure I'd locked the car. I always do, but there he was, quiet and calm, like none of that drop-off ever happened, like the first part of the night had just looped, rewound itself without asking. I don't know if it was more disturbing to think he'd broken in, or that maybe I hadn't locked it after all. Maybe I'd never had control in the first place. Either way, it was clear the night wasn't over. Not for him, and apparently, not for me either. The second drive back felt longer, even though it was the same route, same roads, same empty intersections. But the silence had changed. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was frayed, thin, stretched. I kept glancing in the mirror, not because I thought he'd move, but because I didn't know what I was supposed to do with him. He started muttering about halfway there. Not to me, not really. Just words, low and slow, like he was explaining something to himself for the 100th time. I couldn't make out all of it, but the pieces that landed stuck hard. He talked about the house, about the people inside, that they wouldn't leave, that they were still there. I asked once, carefully, what he meant, if it was his family or someone else. He said it used to be his parents' place, but the way he said used to felt like it carried more weight than time. He wasn't grieving. He wasn't angry. He sounded tired, like whatever had happened, whatever still was happening in that place, had worn him down until there was nothing left to fight against. I wanted to stop the car. I wanted to tell him to get out and walk, to leave whatever that house was behind him. But I didn't. I just kept driving, pretending the road was the only thing that mattered. And maybe it was. Maybe keeping the car in motion was the only thing keeping whatever this was from pulling me in too. When we pulled up again, nothing had changed. Same cracked driveway, same porch with the crooked railing, same heavy dark windows like eyes that didn't blink. But this time, he didn't hesitate. He opened the door, stepped out, and walked up to the house without even glancing back. He didn't knock, didn't check for keys. Just stood there at the foot of the porch like the door was supposed to open on its own. I left the car in drive, foot on the brake, watching through the windshield like I was waiting for something to move. In him, in the house, I don't know. But nothing did. He stood there, and I sat there, and the longer I stayed, the more I felt like I was the one intruding. Like I'd interrupted something ancient and private. Eventually, I rolled forward down the block, turned the corner, and parked under the first working street lamp I could find. I didn't turn the engine off. I didn't even breathe right. I just sat there with the fan humming and my pulse climbing into my throat. I should have called someone. I should have reported it. But how do you explain a feeling? How do you describe that kind of quiet? I never saw him again. But I've thought about that moment more than I should. Not because of what he said, not even because of what he did, but because of how still he was, like he was waiting for something that already knew he'd come back. And some nights, when it's late and I catch myself driving past certain kinds of houses, I wonder if he's still there, or worse, if he never really left. Some things you replay over and over. Not because you want to, but because something about them never settles. I've had years to forget this night, and part of me really thought I had. But every now and then, especially when it's late and quiet, pieces of it drift back in. And when they do, it always starts the same way, with that empty parking lot, and the man standing under the light like he was waiting for more than just a ride. It was one of those nights where everything felt a little bit too still, like the air wasn't moving right. The kind of quiet where even your own breath sounds louder than it should. I had just dropped off a guy near a budget motel and figured I'd call it soon, maybe grab something greasy and head home. Then the ping came through. Baxter Lanes, 6 minutes out. I knew the spot. Half the strip mall was boarded up, and the bowling alley hadn't updated its neon signs since the 90s. I pulled in, expecting to see the usual someone waving, maybe pacing, maybe drunk. But there was just him, standing dead center beneath the parking lot light, not looking at his phone, not looking around, just standing there with his hands in his jacket like he'd been planted. I slowed down as I got closer, kind of expecting him to step forward or give some kind of signal. He didn't. He didn't move at all until I was maybe 5 feet away. It's weird. I've had plenty of rides where people give off weird energy, comes with the job. But this was different. He wasn't twitchy or high or anything like that. He was just still, calm, but in the wrong kind of way. Like someone waiting to do something they'd already decided on. I remember my fingers hovering near the cancel button for a second, but I didn't press it. Maybe I didn't want to make a big deal out of a vibe. Maybe I was too tired to care. Or maybe I didn't want to believe that something small, something quiet like that could actually mean something. But now, I think that was the moment I should have trusted my gut. There's a kind of silence that doesn't just fill a space, it presses in on you. The second he got in and closed the door, it was like the air got heavier. No greeting, no small talk, not even a sigh, just that steady presence behind me. I tapped the screen to confirm the address, got the usual yeah, and we pulled off the lot like it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. I've had plenty of quiet riders, the kind who just want to get from point A to B without a word. But this guy didn't feel quiet. He felt deliberate. Every time I glanced at the rearview mirror, he was sitting the same way, staring straight ahead. Not out the window, not at me, just at the space between us, like he was thinking about something that had nothing to do with the ride. And the longer it went on, the more I started to feel like he wasn't just sitting back there. He was waiting. I tried to say something halfway through the drive, something basic about the weather or how late it had gotten, just to cut the tension. But when he answered, if you could call it that, it was like talking into fog, flat, barely there. And maybe it was the tone, or maybe it was what he didn't say, but it made things worse. It was like poking at something you should have just left alone. After that, I stopped trying. I kept my eyes on the road, but I never stopped checking that mirror. And every time I did, he was still there, still staring. It felt less like giving someone a ride, and more like carrying something I wasn't supposed to touch. I remember the road we were on. Smooth, familiar, lit just enough to keep things normal. We had maybe 10 minutes left on the trip. Nothing out of the ordinary. Then he said something about a shortcut, pointed toward a narrow street I hadn't noticed until then. Ridgeway Drive. The name didn't ring a bell, but I slowed down out of habit. It curved off the main road like it didn't want to be found. The turn didn't feel right. It was barely wide enough for 2 cars, and there weren't any lights, just that kind of ambient dark that eats your headlights. I hesitated, but I still made the turn. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want to seem rude. Maybe I thought if I acted uneasy, it'd escalate something I wasn't ready for. Or maybe I just didn't want to admit out loud that I was already scared. As soon as we were on that road, it felt like the world dropped away. No houses, no signs, just a fence here, a thicket of trees there, like we'd slipped into some back pocket of the town that time forgot. I kept checking the GPS. It was still rerouting, lagging a little, like even it didn't know where we were. He didn't say anything after that, didn't explain where it led or why it was better. He just sat there quiet, like we were exactly where we were supposed to be. I kept thinking, what's the worst that could happen? But I didn't ask the better question. Why did he want to go this way at all? The house came into view like it had been waiting for us. Set back from the road, half hidden behind tall grass and bare branches. It didn't look abandoned in the dramatic sense, just forgotten. The kind of place that had once been lived in but hadn't been touched in a long time. Porch light busted, mailbox hanging crooked on one rusted hinge. The siding looked like it had given up trying to hold itself together. I slowed down without thinking, half expecting him to correct me, to say, "No, not this one," but he didn't. He just motioned toward it, calm as ever, like this was the plan all along. I pulled into the gravel driveway, tires crunching softly, and kept my foot lightly on the brake. I wasn't sure why yet, but something in me had switched from curious to alert. It didn't feel like a drop-off. It felt like a pause, like we were in between things. I stared at the house while pretending to check the app, hoping for a reason to pull back onto the road. But there was no mistake. This was it. And the way he sat there, still and easy, told me he'd been here before. Maybe not to this exact spot, but to this kind of place. I tried to keep my breathing steady, but my brain had already started filling in the blanks. Who lived here? Why it was empty? What he needed from it? And none of the answers I came up with made me feel any better. He didn't head toward the porch. Didn't pause like he was double-checking the house number, or waiting for a porch light to flick on. No knock. No front door. He stepped out and moved around the side of the building like he had a purpose, like he'd been there before, or maybe just didn't care who saw him. The grass swallowed his legs by the time he hit the edge of the house, and then he was gone. Just like that. Not a sound. Not a word. I stayed in the car with the engine running, staring at the place where he'd vanished. The kind of stare where your eyes start to burn but you don't blink. My fingers hovered over the gear shift. I told myself I'd give it 2 minutes, then 5. Maybe he forgot something inside. Maybe this was some weird late-night errand. But none of it made sense, and the longer I sat there, the more it felt like the ground was shifting under me. Slow and quiet, but real. The house didn't look any different from the outside, but it felt different now, like it was holding something in. I kept glancing at the rear view, half expecting to see him standing there again, without warning. Every little noise, the click of the vents, a dog barking in the distance, the soft crack of something settling, made me flinch. I couldn't tell if I was being paranoid, or if I was finally waking up to how wrong this all was. And still, I didn't leave. Not then. I told myself I was just being professional, that I'd wait until the ride ended properly. But the truth is, I was frozen. Not physically, mentally. Like whatever choice I had to make, it had already been made for me. I saw him in the mirror before I heard him. He came from the same direction he'd disappeared into, stepping out of the shadows like nothing had happened, but he didn't look the same. He wasn't dirty or panicked or even out of breath. If anything, he looked more focused, like something had clicked into place. There was this weird charge in the air the second he reached for the door handle, like static building just before a storm breaks. I unlocked the doors, even though every nerve in me was telling me not to. He got in without saying a word at first, just settled into the same seat like we'd never stopped moving. But something had shifted. It was in his posture, in the way he leaned slightly forward, like he was tuned into something I wasn't. Then came the words, vague, soft, but with weight, like he knew where he wanted to go but didn't want to put it in the app. He just told me to drive, like that was enough. And I did, without asking why, without pressing for an address. I felt like I was drifting into something I didn't choose, but I also couldn't pull back from it. He stared straight ahead, and I could feel him watching me through the rear view again. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It felt like calculation. Every second I spent driving, I wasn't thinking about the road. I was thinking about what came next. Whether he was deciding something, whether I was a part of that decision. I didn't know if I was in danger or just playing a role I didn't understand. But I knew, without question, that I wasn't in control anymore. And I wasn't sure I ever had been. We pulled back into the parking lot at Baxter Lanes like nothing had happened. Same flickering light overhead. Same sagging awning. Same stretch of cracked pavement I'd pulled into less than an hour ago. But it didn't feel like the same place. It felt emptied out, like something had been scraped clean and left behind. I stopped the car, hands loose on the wheel, heart thudding like it hadn't caught up with the rest of me. He didn't move right away, just sat there in the back seat, not speaking, not reaching for the door. I could feel him behind me, not like a person but like a presence, like a pressure. And then, almost casually, he said something. Not loud, not threatening, but it landed in my chest like a weight I didn't know how to carry. I can't remember the exact words anymore, not completely, but I remember how they made me feel, like I'd stumbled into something I was never meant to witness, like he had been waiting to say it, and I'd just happened to be the one who showed up. He stepped out and didn't look back, didn't shut the door all the way at first, just left it hanging open, like he wanted me to follow or say something. I didn't. I couldn't. He walked off toward the alley behind the lanes, and within seconds, he was gone. Just darkness and silence, and that buzzing light. I sat there for a long time. I didn't even check the app right away. I just stared at the spot where he'd stood and tried to figure out what I'd just been part of. I still don't know, and maybe that's the part that haunts me most. Not what happened, but what almost did. It's strange what your mind chooses to hold on to. This night, no matter how much I try, I can't let it go. It's not even the worst night I've ever had. Not on the surface. Nothing cinematic. No big, dramatic twist. Just a series of moments that didn't feel like much when they were happening, but started to rot in my head after. I used to feel safe in my own space. That changed slowly, quietly, and by the time I realized something was wrong, it was already too late to undo it. It had been one of those deep, clean Saturdays where the air smells like lemon disinfectant and open windows. I'd been on my feet for hours, scrubbing, vacuuming, folding, wiping down every stupid surface in that tiny apartment. It's something I do before Jake visits. He only comes in on weekends, and I guess I like things to feel perfect before he walks through the door. That weird mix of excitement and exhaustion had kicked in by the time I finally ordered dinner. I remember sitting on the couch, hair still damp from the shower, legs sore, stomach growling. I didn't want to touch a single pan after making everything sparkle. When I got the delivered ping on my phone, I actually smiled, like finally. But the knock that followed wasn't what I expected. Devin, my upstairs neighbor, was standing there with the takeout bag, holding it like it was evidence. He had this tight expression on his face, like he wasn't sure how to say what he needed to say. Something about the delivery guy, how he'd seen him walking too close to my windows, staring in. I remember blinking at him, trying to keep the moment light because it sounded ridiculous. I made some awkward comment, took the food, said thanks. I don't even remember if I locked the door after. I just went back inside like it didn't matter. But the thing is, it did. There was this small shift in the air after that. Like someone had nudged the foundation of a memory that used to feel safe, and I didn't know it yet. But that knock wasn't the delivery. It was the start. Milo isn't the kind of dog that barks at leaves or gets spooked by the ice maker. He's a quiet little guy, all curled up naps and half-hearted tail wags. That's why it felt off. The way he hovered near the back sliding door, ears stiff, body tense, growling so low I could barely hear it unless the room was totally still. He'd take a few steps back like he was retreating, then inch forward again, nose to the glass, like he was tracking something I couldn't see. At first, I rolled my eyes and told him to relax, probably a raccoon or the neighbor's cat, but his whole posture was wrong. His muscles were tight, like he was holding in something primal. I muted the TV just to hear better, and that's when it got quiet in a way that made my chest tighten. No cars, no wind, no neighborhood chatter, just that low growl and the hum of the fridge. It was the kind of silence that feels personal, like someone's watching you hold your breath. I didn't get up to check the yard. I don't know why, maybe I didn't want to confirm the feeling. I pulled the curtain shut, but it didn't help. I still felt it. That invisible pressure, like the air had thickened near the glass. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a small voice started asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. Like, what if Devin was right? It was late, and I couldn't sleep. Not because anything was wrong exactly. At least, that's what I told myself. But more like my body hadn't caught up to the idea that the day was over. I was scrolling through my phone, half distracted, when I opened the app just to check if the tip went through. I do that sometimes. Not out of guilt, just habit. But then I saw something that made my fingers freeze mid-scroll. Under the delivery notes section, the one where I always leave the same basic line about leaving food at the door, there was a sentence I hadn't written, a comment, short, almost casual, and weirdly specific in a way that made my skin tighten around my shoulders. It wasn't offensive or threatening, but it noticed me, not the building, not the order. Me. I stared at it for way too long, rereading it like maybe I was misunderstanding, like maybe there was some glitch or mix-up or explanation that would click if I just looked at it the right way. But it stayed there, plain as anything, and I knew the words hadn't come from me. That's when the pattern started to sink in. Devin at the door, Milo by the glass, now this, and suddenly, it didn't feel like a fluke. It felt intentional, personal. I deleted the app right after, but the feeling didn't leave with it. It was already sitting in my bones. It must have been close to 2 a.m. Maybe later. I'd finally dozed off, still feeling weird from earlier, but I wasn't really sleeping, just floating in that shallow place where your brain won't turn all the way off. Milo was curled at the foot of the bed, quiet for the first time in hours, and I remember thinking, maybe it really was nothing. Maybe Devin had overreacted. Maybe that note in the app had a boring, logical explanation. Then Milo bolted upright with a snarl so sharp it made my heart race before I was even awake. A second later, that sound. It wasn't a knock, not like someone looking for attention. It was flatter than that, heavy like a hand or a fist hitting the glass without hesitation. Not hard enough to break it, but hard enough to feel deliberate. My body reacted before my brain did. I yanked the comforter over my head without thinking, the way you do when you're little and convinced the blanket is some kind of force field. I left just enough of a gap near my eyes so I could still see the outline of the window, and I stayed there, completely still. Milo was pacing, barking, whining, every sound bouncing off the walls like they didn't belong in my room. I didn't want to move, didn't want to look too closely. I thought if I didn't move, maybe whatever it was wouldn't either. But my heart was pounding so loud, I thought I'd gone deaf, and in that moment, frozen under a blanket I suddenly realized couldn't protect me. All I could think was someone was right there, inches from where I sleep. I didn't plan to grab the knife, my body just moved. 1 second I was still tucked in bed trying not to breathe too loud, and the next I was on my feet, barefoot, moving through the dark like I was being pulled towards something. I opened the silverware drawer slowly, careful not to let it clatter. I remember how cold the handle felt in my hand, like it didn't belong there, like I shouldn't be holding it. I crouched low by the kitchen window. It looks out across the gravel lot behind the complex, just a wide open stretch of dirt and cracked pavement, where people let their dogs run or park old trailers. That's when I saw it. The same car, the silver hatchback from earlier. It wasn't moving, no lights on, just sitting there, alone, like it had nowhere better to be. At first, I told myself it couldn't be the same one. There are other silver cars, right? But the shape was too familiar. The placement, the way it was angled slightly toward my building, like whoever parked it wanted a clear view of the side entrance. I squinted, trying to see if anyone was inside, but the windows were too dark, tinted maybe, or just shadow. I held my breath, waiting for movement. Nothing. No flicker, no outline, no shift, but it didn't matter. I knew. He never left. He delivered my food hours ago, and now he was back. Or maybe he never left at all. Maybe he'd been parked there this whole time, watching the lights turn off in my apartment, one by one. And the worst part? I had no idea what he was waiting for. When the flashing lights finally washed through the blinds, I felt this weird, shaky kind of relief, like I could finally let go of the breath I didn't even know I'd been holding. The officers moved fast but quiet, like they didn't want to wake the neighborhood. One of them came to the door and asked me to stay inside for now. I just nodded and stood there with the knife still in my hand, suddenly unsure what I was supposed to do with it. I ended up setting it on the counter, like it had never been part of the story. I watched from the kitchen window as they walked the property. One of them had a flashlight, sweeping it along the ground, slow and methodical. The beam caught something, and he stopped, knelt down. The other joined him. They stood there for a long time, talking low. Then one of them pointed toward the side of the building. When they came back, one of them said there were tracks, a lot of them, deep, muddy prints, clear from the rain the night before, cutting through the soft ground near the back fence. I remember the way he said it, calm, matter of fact, like it was just another part of the job. But then he paused, told me the prints didn't just go to the backyard, they looped around, all the way to the front door, and suddenly I felt sick, because it meant whoever had been out there hadn't just come and gone. He circled, watched from more than one angle, maybe even tried more than one entrance, and the fact that they didn't find him, that was the part that stuck, because it meant he was close, just not close enough to catch. The second knock came just before dawn, loud, fast, and heavy against the door. My body jerked awake like it had been waiting for something to go wrong again. I didn't even feel fear at first, just confusion. My heart wasn't sure whether to panic or relax. For a second, it almost felt like a replay, like maybe he'd come back, and this time I wouldn't be lucky. But when I peeked through the peephole, it was the same officer from before. Her face was serious, but there was something else, something like relief. She told me they'd stayed nearby, parked down the road with their lights off, waiting, just in case. And it turns out they were right too. He came back, walked right up to my door again, like it was part of his routine, like he hadn't already been chased off, like he was trying to figure out how to finish whatever he'd started. I remember standing there, arms folded over my chest, nodding while she explained everything. She said he was in custody now, that I was safe, that I didn't have to worry anymore. But I wasn't really hearing her, because all I could think about was how confident he must have been, how sure of himself, like he really believed no one was watching, like he thought he had more time. And I keep going back to that, over and over. Not the knock, not the car, not even the tracks in the mud, just the look in her eyes when she told me he came back, and the feeling that somehow, even though he's gone, something's still not done.